Okay, this is chapter 15, Anna and the King. The effect of Leor's almost miraculous return to her husband was far-reaching. Slaves going into the city from the palace on business told the story to shopkeepers, who passed it on to their customers. Some of the great ladies of the inside complained bitterly to their families outside. They were frightened by the thought that a slave could demand and get freedom merely because the price of it was available. Their fortunes and their comfort depended upon the possession of hundreds of slaves. From that time forward, Anna had powerful enemies among the nobility who suspected her of revolutionary ideas. To the common people, she became a heroine, the White Angel. When she entered the temple schoolroom, she found on her chair flowers plucked by slaves' hands and woven into garlands. It was as if the humble people of the palace and city had lifted their heads in hope of something better. A week after Leor was freed, the attention of the court swung away to other things. The king and those about him were deeply involved with the cremation of one of the king's sons. The cremation was to be on a grand scale, and school had been dismissed for a week so that the royal children might attend. Anna was glad to have a little time to catch up on her personal correspondence and teach Louis. It so happened, then, that both of them were at home on the afternoon of May 14. Louis called out, "Look, Mama, look," and pointed up the river toward the palace. One of the royal barges had shot out into the midst of the river traffic and was coming toward them with tremendous speed. The boats of the market gave way hurriedly for the barge, a boat. Zoe. The moment it had come alongside the quay, a slave ran to Anna with a letter bearing the king's seal. Anna broke it open and read, "My dear ma'am, our well-beloved daughter, your favorite pupil, is attacked with cholera and has earnest desire to see you and has heard much to make frequent repetition of your name. I beg that you will favor her wish. I fear her illness is mortal, as there has been 3 deaths since morning. She is best beloved of my children. I am your afflicted friend, Maha Mungat." What? Cholera is a disease. No, she has cholera. It's a disease. It's a condition. The slave added an entreaty. "My lady," she cried, 3 slaves are lying dead in the princess's court, and the Fa Ying was seized this morning. She keeps crying out for you. Please come to her quickly." Anna stopped only long enough to tell Louis that he must stay with Bibi and go nowhere at all and eat nothing but what Bibi cooked, and then she was in the barge. There was a coldness around her heart, and her hands were wet with sweat. Well, I'm recording. Yeah. The boat seemed to crawl across the river. She learned that the little princess had gone with several other, Abigail, you need to move, honey, of the royal children to the theatricals and fireworks, which were part of the cremation festivities. Honey, I gotta have my foot here. I need you to scoot over, please. Okay, hey guys, I'm in the middle of recording and you guys are not being respectful. Abigail, scoot over. The boat seemed to crawl across the river. She learned that the little princess had gone with several of the other royal children to the theatricals and fireworks, which were part of the cremation festivities on the evening before. She had seemed perfectly well. There had been cholera in the city for some weeks past, as there was every year, but no one had thought much about it since the epidemic was not serious. "Can't you go a little faster?" Anna urged the rowers, but they were already exerting themselves to the limit of their strength. The current seemed to shove against them, and when Anna reached the heavy gates, they opened with incredible slowness. She was breathless when she reached the little princess's room. Dr. Campbell from the British consulate was the first person she saw. "She is dying," he told her sadly. The Fa Ying lay on a mattress in the middle of a carpet, under a canopy hung with mosquito netting. Around her bed, relatives and slaves were chanting in anxious urgency, Fra Arahan, Fra Arahan, the most sacred of the titles of Buddha, which is repeated in the ears of the dying to remind the soul to go to heaven and not lose its way. Old Princess Lamam, who had raised the child, was kneeling on the floor at her feet, too overcome to do more than whisper the sacred words. "Not this child," Anna's heart protested. "Of all the children in the palace, surely not this one child." The Fa Ying opened her eyes. Recognition stirred. She held out her arms. Anna flew to her, picked her up, and held her tight against her breast. The Fa Ying nestled close to her with a faint sigh and lay still. Anna closed her own eyes in a vain effort to press back the tears, and when she looked down again, the Fa Ying was dead. Anna kissed the delicate face, thinking with a sharp spasm of grief that there was no more need for the chant now. This little one would never lose her way again. She laid the tiny body on the mattress and straightened up. The meaning of what she had done reached those in the room. The death chant was succeeded by a sudden burst of wailing. The sound rose through the afternoon air and was caught up by others of the harem who were kneeling on the pavement outside. Anna could hear the shrill lament echo and re-echo faintly through the streets of the inside as word was passed along. Dr. Bradley and I did everything we could, Dr. Campbell said heavily as he leaned down and picked up his bag. It was already too late when they called us. Her pulse was faint and her skin was cold. He sighed, looked at Anna briefly, and went out. Anna was stunned by the swiftness of the cholera. Only yesterday the Fa Ying had been alive and happy. Just a few short hours ago, she had embodied all that was dear to her royal father and many of her teacher's hopes for the future. Now she was gone. One of the women in charge begged Anna to carry the terrible news to the king. None of them dared to tell him that his favorite child was dead. Anna agreed when she saw that the panic of the woman was real. I'm recording. Sorry. Attendants conducted her to the door of his study. He was sitting apart, still dressed in the white garments he had worn to the cremation of his son. He had just returned from lighting the pyre. As Anna entered the room, she searched her mind for words with which to break the news to him, and she could find none. But she did not need any. He read her face, and covering his own hands, wept passionately. What could she say? There was nothing. She sat helpless and yet unwilling to go, leaving the king alone with his grief. It was late afternoon, and the last of the sunlight slanted through the windows. The great clock on the nearby tower tolled 6. The king sat with his head sunk in his hands, mourning for his child, murmuring her name as if the Fa Ying were still there on his knee. Tears streamed down Anna's cheeks as she listened. So for an hour they sat almost without speaking. And during this time they were not an English school teacher and a haughty Eastern monarch, but a man and a woman weeping together for a beautiful child they had both loved. Then Anna left quietly. It was morning before the king was able to go to the hall where the Fa Ying's body lay on a white satin cushion fringed with heavy gold. In the quiet room, all were weeping. With trembling lips, the royal father took the little body in his arms and bathed it in a ceremonial manner by pouring cold water over it. In this, he was followed by the other members of the royal family and by relatives of the princess and by the ladies in waiting. Each advanced in the order of her rank and poured water from a silver bowl over the slender body. 2 sisters of the king then shrouded it in a sitting posture, wrapping it tightly in long strips of waxed cloth, overlaid it with perfume, frankincense, and myrrh, and swaddled it in a fine winding sheet. When these preparations were complete, each person crept to the body and took a formal leave of it by repeating Pai Sawan Na, Chow Fa Ying Cha. Go now to heaven, Chow Fa Ying. After the leave-taking was over, 3 young girls dressed in white brought 2 golden urns. The body was gently deposited in the first, and this in turn was placed in the second, which was of finer gold and richly adorned with precious stone. The double urn was placed on a gilt sedan and borne under a royal umbrella to the temple of the Dusit Maha Prasat, where it was mounted on a platform 6 feet high and surrounded with lighted tapers, tall candles, and fragrant oil lamps, which hung from the ceiling. These lights would burn night and day until the cremation. The king had followed the body of his favorite child from the palace with anguish in his face. During the ceremony, he sat apart, his head buried in his hands. Insignia pertaining to the rank of the little princess were placed below the urn. Then the musicians struck up a lamentation ending in a solemn dirge. When this had been completed, His Majesty and all the princely company retired, leaving the lovely Fa Ying in the peaceful beauty of the Maha Prasat. A few days later, the same royal bards that had come to summon Anna to the deathbed of the Fa Ying, bearing the same female slaves, came again in haste to her house. His Majesty commanded her presence at once. Is someone else ill with the cholera? She asked in alarm, but they would not say. When she arrived at the school pavilion, she found it decorated with flowers. Her chair had been painted red, and around the back and arms and legs, fresh flowers had been twined. The books of the Fa Ying were laid out in order on the table in front of Anna's accustomed place. Across them had been placed a sheaf of roses and lilies. The women of the harem were bustling about. Some of them whispered to her that an extraordinary honor was about to be bestowed on her. Puzzled and apprehensive, she submitted quietly to being enthroned in the gorgeous chair. The paint was hardly dry, and she groaned inwardly at the thought of the damage to her dress. In a little while, a messenger came from the king to ask whether Anna had arrived. As soon as he knew that she was in her place, he descended from his chambers, accompanied by the great ladies of the harem, the dowagers, his sisters, cousins, and aunts, paternal and maternal. When he had shaken hands with Anna and Louis, he explained the nature of the occasion. He was about to confer on Anna a distinction that had never been given to any foreigner. It was in consideration of her devoted interest in his daughter and for her courage and conduct, as he expressed it, at the deathbed of his well-beloved child. Then, bidding Anna remain seated, he carefully took 7 threads of unspun cotton and passed them over her head and over the dead child's books, and then placed the end of each single strand in the palm of each of the 7 of his elder sisters. This done, he solemnly sprinkled Anna with 21 drops of water from a jeweled conch shell while chanting in Sanskrit. Then, handing her a small silk bag, he commanded her to rise Chow Kun Kru Yai, Lord, most excellent teacher. Anna was touched and embarrassed by her new honors and surprised to find that the bag contained a patent of nobility and the title to many roods of land in the far-off district of Lopburi. To reach her new estate, she learned she would have to make a long journey through dense jungle on the back of an elephant. Louis, who longed to ride an elephant through the jungle, was disappointed when Anna decided against it. She explained that she wanted tigers, elephants, rhinoceroses, wild boars, armadillos, and monkeys who inhabited her land to live free and undisturbed. I do not think their happiness depends on meeting us, she told Louis. In fact, I am sure of it, my dear.